The year was 96 AD, and Rome was reeling from the sudden death of Emperor Domitian. Fear and uncertainty gripped the city, for Domitian's reign had been one of fear and oppression. Citizens whispered in the shadows about executions and confiscations, and the Senate, long humiliated under Domitian's tyranny, saw this as an opportunity for reasserting their dignity. Yet the power vacuum was dangerous. The empire had endured civil wars in its past when succession was unclear, and the army's loyalty often determined the next emperor. In this tense atmosphere, Marcus Caecus Nerva, a man in his mid-60s, was approached by the Senate. Known for his integrity and moderate stance, Nerva had served as consul and had earned respect among Rome's elite, but he had little military experience. He was seen as a compromise, a man who could soothe the Senate's anger and restore some sense of justice, yet he lacked the immediate authority the legions might demand. Reluctantly, he accepted the position of emperor, aware that stepping into power at his age and without the support of the army could be a perilous choice. Nerva's early days as emperor were cautious. He sought to stabilize the empire after Domitian's turbulent rule. He repealed some of the harsher laws, restored property seized during the previous reign, and attempted to reconcile with the Senate. Yet, for all his wisdom, the streets of Rome were not entirely peaceful. Soldiers loyal to Domitian's memory expressed discontent, and occasional uprisings reminded Nerva that emperorship was not merely ceremonial. One particularly tense day, a mutiny broke out at the Castra Praetoria, the camp of the Praetorian Guard. The soldiers demanded rewards for their past loyalties, threatening to march on the city if their demands were not met. Nerva faced a crucial choice: confront them with force, risking bloodshed, or negotiate and risk appearing weak. Choosing diplomacy, Nerva offered gifts and assurances, calming the unrest. Though some saw this as a sign of weakness, others recognized the strategic brilliance behind his actions. He understood that Rome needed stability above all, and that winning the loyalty of the army was essential to prevent chaos. Over time, this pragmatic approach earned him a reputation as a patient and thoughtful ruler, in contrast to the fear-driven rule of his predecessor. However, Nerva knew that his reign would be defined not by his own actions alone, but by his choice of a successor. Without an heir or a biological son, the future of the empire rested on his judgment. He sought a man who could unite the Senate and the army, a man whose reputation for honor and capability could secure the empire's future. After careful consideration, Nerva adopted Marcus Oppius Trajanus, better known as Trajan, a respected general beloved by the legions. This decision would later be celebrated as one of the most shrewd moves in imperial history, ensuring a peaceful transition and the continuation of Rome's strength. Despite his advanced age, Nerva worked tirelessly to leave a mark on the empire. Public works were initiated to improve the infrastructure of Rome, social reforms provided relief to the poor, and efforts to stabilize the empire's finances were undertaken. Though his reign was short, spanning only 3 years, Nerva's leadership set a precedent for wisdom, moderation, and careful planning. In the annals of Roman history, he would be remembered not for conquest or spectacle, but for his dedication to preserving the stability of an empire teetering on the edge of unrest. Though Nerva had assumed power with cautious optimism, the ghosts of the past lingered heavily over Rome. The memories of Domitian's tyranny were fresh. Families whose members had been executed or exiled under the former emperor still whispered in fear, and old grudges simmered beneath the surface. The Senate, though relieved to see a more measured ruler, remained wary. Nerva knew he had to act not only as a magistrate, but also as a symbol of reassurance for a city still haunted by terror. One of Nerva's first decrees was aimed at restoring faith in the justice system. He mandated investigations into wrongful convictions, allowing many innocent citizens to reclaim property and honor stripped from them under Domitian. However, these reforms were not universally welcomed.
Some senators, previously complicit or beneficiaries of the old regime, feared exposure and quietly plotted against him. Nerva, wise and cautious, did not confront them directly. Instead, he relied on careful observation and discreet alliances to secure his position. His age and experience made him cautious, but he was acutely aware that Rome's survival depended on political balance, not brute force. Meanwhile, the Praetorian Guard remained a source of unease. These elite soldiers had become accustomed to wielding significant political power during Domitian's reign, often determining the fate of emperors. Though Nerva had managed to calm them with gifts and promises, he knew that the loyalty of the army was always conditional. A single misstep could provoke mutiny, and any sign of weakness might embolden ambitious generals. For this reason, he often consulted military advisors and sought to understand the needs and moods of the legions stationed throughout the empire. Rome, he realized, was a city where wisdom and patience could avert disaster, but only if backed by strategic action. Nerva's relationship with the Senate grew increasingly complex. While some senators appreciated his attempts to restore dignity to the governing body, others resented the limitations imposed by an emperor who wielded ultimate authority. Discussions in the Curia were heated, debates stretching late into the night over policy, taxation, and military funding. Yet Nerva remained a mediator, often diffusing tensions with a calm demeanor and measured words. He had learned that Rome thrived not through fear or spectacle, but through dialogue and compromise, a stark contrast to the authoritarian style of his predecessor. Amid these challenges, Nerva never lost sight of the broader horizon. He understood that the empire's long-term stability depended on leadership beyond his own lifetime. Without a natural heir, the succession of power was uncertain, and history had repeatedly shown the dangers of leaving the future to chance. After much contemplation, he observed the rising star of Trajan, a general whose loyalty, competence, and popularity with the troops made him an ideal candidate for adoption. This decision was not without risk. Some in the Senate feared that a military man might overshadow civil authority. Yet Nerva trusted that a balance could be maintained, and the Trajan's qualities would safeguard the empire's continuity. In private, Nerva often reflected on the irony of his position. He had become emperor in his 60s, at a time when most men sought retirement and quietude, yet he bore the weight of an entire empire. Nights were spent poring over correspondence, reviewing reports from distant provinces, and planning measures to ensure that Rome would remain secure. Each decision required careful consideration. A single miscalculation could unravel decades of progress. And though he did not wield the sword personally, he understood that the power of an emperor was ultimately measured by the loyalty he commanded, the justice he dispensed, and the wisdom with which he guided his people.
By the middle of his reign, Nerva had settled into a rhythm that balanced governance, diplomacy, and subtle displays of authority. Rome itself seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Streets, once tense with fear, carried a quieter air. Markets flourished as trade revived, and artisans found opportunities to reclaim their livelihoods. Yet beneath the surface of prosperity, Nerva remained vigilant. He knew that an empire as vast as Rome was fragile. Unrest in a distant province could ripple across borders, and the smallest spark could ignite widespread chaos. Nerva often visited the provinces through messengers' reports, reading about challenges in Britannia, Germania, and Hispania. While he rarely traveled himself due to his age, he relied on his advisors to convey intelligence accurately. Corruption, rebellious governors, and unsettled local populations were constant concerns. In response, he issued directives to reinforce local governance, ensuring loyalty to the central authority while respecting local customs. His approach contrasted sharply with Domitian's heavy-handed enforcement. Nerva believed that true stability arose from collaboration, not coercion. The emperor's social reforms were another source of attention. He sought to alleviate the burdens on the poor, providing assistance and restoring confiscated lands to those unfairly dispossessed.
Public projects were launched to improve aqueducts, roads, and temples, boosting both morale and employment. Citizens came to see Nerva as a fatherly figure, someone who recognized their struggles and worked to ease them. Stories circulated of him personally listening to grievances, a rare act for a man of his rank. This combination of practical governance and moral authority strengthened the perception that Nerva was not merely a caretaker of Rome, but a wise shepherd of its people. Still, the question of succession loomed over every decision. Adopting Trajan had been a calculated risk. While the Senate and populace were generally supportive, some conservative elements feared giving power to a military man. Nerva, however, trusted his judgment. Trajan's reputation as a disciplined general, coupled with his fairness and respect for Roman law, suggested that he could bridge the gap between army and Senate. Nerva's foresight in this matter became his defining act. Historians would later view it as one of the most important decisions in imperial succession. It was a choice rooted not in ambition, but in responsibility to the empire itself. Despite his age and the constant pressure of governance, Nerva found moments of reflection. He would walk through the gardens of the Palatium, observing the Tiber River winding through the city, and contemplate the delicate balance of power and responsibility. The weight of the crown was not merely political, it was moral, ethical, and deeply personal. Every decree carried potential consequences. Every alliance or concession could ripple through generations. He understood that Rome's greatness was measured not by the fear it inspired, but by the wisdom of those entrusted to guide it. But history was not content to allow peace to endure indefinitely. Unrest in the provinces occasionally flared into rebellion, and discontent among the Praetorians reminded Nerva that even the wisest ruler must occasionally assert authority. One morning, reports arrived of minor uprisings in Pannonia and Dacia. Nerva acted decisively but cautiously, sending experienced generals to negotiate first, rather than immediately resorting to bloodshed. By balancing firmness with mercy, he maintained order while avoiding unnecessary conflict, a hallmark of his reign that would influence generations of emperors to come. By the second year of his reign, Nerva's relationship with Trajan had deepened beyond formal succession planning. What began as a practical adoption of a promising general had evolved into a mentorship, where Nerva sought to impart the wisdom of governance and the subtle art of balancing power. In the quiet rooms of the imperial palace, the two men often discussed the future of the empire. Trajan, disciplined and eager, absorbed Nerva's insights with humility, learning not only how to command armies, but also how to govern citizens and navigate the complexities of the Senate. Nerva emphasized one lesson above all. An emperor's strength was not in the sword alone, but in the respect he earned from both the people and the legions. He shared stories from past emperors, cautioning against the arrogance that had toppled rulers who were brilliant in battle but blind in policy. He spoke of Augustus's careful balancing of power, of Tiberius's missteps, and of Domitian's failures, an instructive mix of cautionary tales and strategic insight. Trajan listened intently, recognizing that he was being groomed not merely to inherit a title, but to embody a philosophy of leadership that prioritized Rome's long-term stability. Yet the mentorship extended beyond strategy. It involved patience, negotiation, and moral judgment. Nerva would often test Trajan's responses to hypothetical crises, asking how he would handle a rebellious governor, a mutinous legion, or a sudden famine. Trajan's answers revealed both his tactical brilliance and a deep sense of justice. Nerva smiled at the young general's wisdom, confident that Rome's future rested in capable hands. Still, he understood that no matter how prepared Trajan might be, the empire could always face unforeseen dangers, and it was his duty to shield his protégé as best as he could. Meanwhile, Nerva's reforms continued to shape Rome. He implemented new policies to ease taxation for small farmers and artisans, reducing the resentment that often fueled uprisings. Legal reforms were introduced to protect citizens from arbitrary punishments and to provide fairer trials. In the provinces, governors were encouraged to act with integrity and accountability rather than exploiting local populations for personal gain. These measures were slow to take effect, but they gradually strengthened Rome's social fabric, making rebellion less likely and loyalty more sustainable. Despite his wisdom and the support of Trajan, Nerva still faced the ever-present threat of the Praetorian Guard. The soldiers had grown accustomed to Domitian's reign of fear and influence, and their loyalty remained conditional on material reward and political favor. One morning, reports arrived of an unrestful murmur among the guards, hinting at discontent. Nerva addressed the matter directly, meeting the officers and offering not only gifts, but also genuine assurances of respect and honor. By combining diplomacy with strategic generosity, he quelled the potential threat without resorting to violence, further solidifying his reputation as a ruler who could govern through intellect rather than intimidation.
As Nerva entered the final year of his reign, the weight of time pressed heavily upon him. Age and constant responsibility had taken their toll, and the emperor knew that the remaining days of his rule must be devoted to securing the future he had carefully planned. Rome had become a city of cautious optimism under his guidance. The Senate, once fearful and resentful, now respected his steady hand, and the legions, once suspicious of an elderly emperor, gradually accepted Trajan as the heir apparent. Nerva spent much of his time in quiet reflection, considering the impermanence of power and the enduring nature of wisdom. He walked the Palatine Hill at dawn, watching the mist rise over the city, and recalled the chaos and bloodshed that had followed poor leadership in Rome's history. Each decision he had made, from calming the Praetorian Guard to implementing social reforms, had been aimed at one goal: preserving stability. Even the adoption of Trajan was a careful calculation, a measure to ensure that Rome would continue to thrive beyond his own mortality. In private moments, Nerva pondered the essence of leadership. It was not the grandeur of triumphs or the opulence of palaces, he realized, but the courage to act with justice and foresight. The young generals he once trained and the senators he guided were now capable of carrying forward the principles he had lived by. Yet he knew that history could be cruel to the wise, and that reputation alone could not safeguard an empire. He placed his trust in institutions, in laws, and in the careful cultivation of loyalty among the people and soldiers alike. The final challenge came quietly, but suddenly. Nerva's health, fragile for years, began to fail rapidly. He faced his mortality with calm acceptance, fully aware that the moment of succession was near. Trajan, ever dutiful and prepared, stood by his side, ready to assume the mantle of leadership. The emperor's final days were spent ensuring that no immediate threats could disrupt the transition. Messages were sent to governors and military commanders, affirming the legitimacy of Trajan's succession and emphasizing the importance of loyalty to Rome above all else. On the last morning of his life, Nerva reflected on what he had achieved. The city thrived, the people were safer, and the empire's foundations were secure. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his careful selection of Trajan would guide Rome into a new era of strength and prosperity. Surrounded by his closest advisors and the young general he had mentored, Nerva passed away peacefully, leaving behind a legacy of wisdom, moderation, and foresight. The Senate and the populace mourned the loss of a ruler who had governed not with fear, but with reason. Trajan assumed the throne smoothly, his popularity with the army and the people ensuring stability. Historians would later regard Nerva as a pivotal figure, an emperor whose short reign was marked not by conquest, but by the careful preservation of the empire, the fostering of justice, and the foresight to prepare the next generation of leadership. In the annals of Rome, he became known as the wise and moderate shepherd of a great civilization, proving that strength often lies not in dominance, but in prudence and vision. Long before Nerva ever ascended to the throne, Marcus Cocceius Nerva had lived a life shaped by discipline, learning, and a deep understanding of Roman law and governance.
Born in 30 AD into a noble but relatively modest family, Nerva experienced the expectations and pressures of Roman society from a young age. His father, a senator, ensured that Marcus received a thorough education in rhetoric, philosophy, and history, emphasizing the importance of virtue, honor, and measured judgment. These early lessons would later define the way he ruled an empire teetering between fear and ambition. As a young man, Nerva distinguished himself through careful observation and political acumen rather than ambition for glory. He served in minor administrative roles, learning the intricacies of bureaucracy and the delicate balance between civic responsibility and personal advancement. Observers noted his calm demeanor, patience, and ability to mediate disputes without alienating parties, a rare quality in a political culture often dominated by force or intimidation. These qualities would mark him later as an emperor capable of steering Rome through turbulent waters without resorting to fear. Nerva's rise through Roman political life was steady but unremarkable by the standards of those seeking military conquest or dramatic displays of power. He was elected consul in 71 AD under Vespasian and gained respect for his impartiality and adherence to justice. Yet even then, he navigated the dangerous terrain of imperial politics with care. He avoided entanglement in the violent purges that sometimes accompanied succession disputes, instead building alliances through loyalty, fairness, and discreet service. This careful approach allowed him to survive the reigns of emperors who often fell to assassination or rebellion. During the turbulent period following Nero's death and the Year of the Four Emperors, Nerva observed the dangers of hasty decisions and impulsive ambition. He saw how military might alone could elevate rulers temporarily, but often failed to secure lasting stability. From the chaos, he learned that a wise ruler needed not only the loyalty of soldiers, but also the respect of the Senate and the people. This realization would shape the strategies he employed decades later, guiding Rome with prudence rather than fear. Despite his cautious nature, Nerva was not without courage. In moments of crisis, he demonstrated the ability to act decisively when the empire's survival required it. He cultivated a reputation as a man whose judgment was measured and whose loyalty to Rome was unquestionable. Such a reputation would later make him the Senate's choice for emperor after Domitian's assassination, a compromise candidate whose age and wisdom promised stability rather than upheaval. Even in his youth, Nerva understood the impermanence of power and the importance of legacy. He studied the lives of past emperors and senators, observing both their successes and failures. He internalized lessons about moderation, diplomacy, and moral leadership. By the time the Senate turned to Nerva in 96 AD, Nerva was not just an elder statesman, but a man whose entire life had been a preparation for this pivotal moment. His wisdom, cultivated over decades, allowed him to step into the highest office in the empire with confidence, despite lacking the military credentials often deemed essential for emperorship. Through these formative years, Nerva developed the qualities that would define his reign: patience, foresight, and a commitment to justice. The foundations of his rule were built long before he donned the imperial purple, rooted in careful study, experience, and an unwavering belief that Rome's strength came from measured governance rather than force alone. In understanding Nerva's early life, one sees the seeds of the prudence and foresight that would later stabilize an empire in turmoil.
Before ascending to the throne, Nerva spent decades navigating the perilous landscape of Domitian's Rome, where ambition often collided with suspicion and violence. Domitian's reign, beginning in 81 AD, was marked by fear, purges, and authoritarian control. Senators and generals tread carefully, aware that a single misstep or even a casual remark could be interpreted as treason.
In such an environment, Nerva relied on his hallmark prudence and discretion, understanding that survival in imperial politics required subtlety rather than force. Despite the dangers, Nerva's integrity allowed him to maintain a reputation as a trustworthy and competent administrator. He served in advisory roles, offering counsel on matters of law, finances, and governments. Domitian, recognizing Nerva's experience and loyalty, granted him responsibilities that could have been traps for less careful men. Nerva's careful adherence to duty, combined with his ability to avoid controversy, earned him the respect of peers and, paradoxically, the cautious trust of an emperor notorious for suspicion. Yet the court of Domitian was no place for complacency. Nerva witnessed firsthand the consequences of dissent, seeing friends and colleagues executed or exiled for imagined slights. He observed Domitian's obsession with loyalty, his insistence on public adoration, and his unpredictable wrath. These experiences impressed upon Nerva the fragility of power and the dangers of ruling through fear alone. It was a lesson he would carry into his own reign, influencing the compassionate and measured style that would later define him as emperor. During these years, Nerva also learned the art of subtle diplomacy. He cultivated alliances with senators, generals, and administrators, carefully balancing loyalty to the emperor with the protection of Rome's institutions. He became skilled at mediation, defusing disputes and preventing conflicts from escalating into open rebellion. His calm demeanor and measured speech allowed him to survive in a court where impulsiveness could be fatal. Even when others faltered, Nerva's patience and foresight preserved his position and prepared him for the challenges of leadership. As Domitian's tyranny intensified, many senators and citizens grew fearful of the emperor's unpredictability. The Praetorian Guard, powerful and influential, became both a tool and a threat, capable of elevating or destroying rulers at a moment's notice. Nerva observed these dynamics closely, recognizing that the true strength of an emperor lay not in intimidation, but in balancing the interests of the Senate, the people, and the military. This insight would later guide his decisive yet careful handling of potential unrest during his own reign. When Domitian was assassinated in 96 AD, Nerva's reputation for integrity and prudence positioned him as the ideal compromise candidate. The Senate, desperate for stability and wary of further bloodshed, turned to him. Though elderly and lacking a military command, Nerva's decades of careful observation and judicious action had prepared him for this pivotal moment. His survival in Domitian's court was no accident. It was the result of a lifetime of patience, wisdom, and strategic foresight. Ascending to power at 66, Nerva carried with him the lessons of the tyrant's court. He understood the perils of ruling by fear, the necessity of political alliances, and the importance of foresight in securing the empire's future. His experiences under Domitian shaped the very core of his leadership philosophy, that Rome thrived not through domination, but through justice, prudence, and respect for its institutions. It was these principles that would guide him through his brief yet impactful reign, ensuring that the empire survived and even prospered during a time of uncertainty. Even as Nerva sought to restore stability in Rome, he knew that the strength of the empire depended not only on the capital, but also on the loyalty of the legions and the order in distant provinces. Rome's vast territories, from the misty forests of Germania to the deserts of Arabia, required governance that combined firmness with fairness. Nerva understood that the loyalty of the legions could not be taken for granted, particularly after decades of emperors who ruled through fear, such as Domitian. The Praetorian Guard remained a constant concern. These elite soldiers had grown accustomed to wielding significant political influence, sometimes even dictating the fate of emperors. Nerva, aware of their power, approached them with caution. He did not attempt to dominate them with force. Instead, he negotiated and rewarded loyalty while emphasizing mutual respect. One memorable instance involved a contingent of the Guard demanding a bonus in return for their continued allegiance. Nerva, calm yet firm, provided the reward but coupled it with a stern reminder of their duty to the empire and the people of Rome. This combination of tact and authority reinforced his reputation as a wise and steady leader. Beyond the city, Nerva's attention extended to the provinces. Governors were instructed to act with fairness and to uphold Roman law, while abuses of power were met with swift investigation. In Hispania, for example, local disputes between landowners and farmers had escalated into unrest. Nerva dispatched envoys and legal experts to mediate the situation, ensuring that both justice and the authority of Rome were preserved. Similarly, in Dacia, reports of minor rebellions were addressed not solely with military force, but through strategic negotiation and the deployment of experienced generals to advise local leaders. Through these measures, Nerva demonstrated a deep understanding of the delicate balance between military strength and civil authority. He recognized that harsh rule might suppress rebellion temporarily, but it would breed resentment and long-term instability. His policies in the provinces emphasized justice, accountability, and the integration of local communities into the broader Roman system. By doing so, he laid the groundwork for peace and prosperity, ensuring that distant territories remained loyal to the empire and reducing the likelihood of large-scale uprisings. Nerva's relationship with Trajan also played a critical role in managing the provinces and the military. Trajan, a respected general with experience on the frontiers, provided insight into the needs and concerns of the legions. Under Nerva's guidance, Trajan learned not only how to command troops, but also how to balance military necessity with justice and diplomacy. Their collaboration exemplified the fusion of wisdom and action, demonstrating to both soldiers and citizens that Rome could be governed effectively and ethically. Through these actions, Nerva reinforced his broader philosophy. The strength of an emperor lay not merely in power or fear, but in the careful stewardship of loyalty, justice, and respect for its institutions. It was these principles that would guide him through his brief yet impactful reign, ensuring that the empire survived and even prospered during a time of uncertainty. While Nerva's diplomacy with the army and provinces stabilized the empire externally, his concern for Rome's citizens shaped his legacy internally. He believed that a just emperor served the people, not merely the Senate or the legions. His reforms sought to repair the social fabric torn during Domitian's oppressive rule and to restore trust in the institutions of governance. Though some measures were modest, their impact resonated widely, demonstrating that even brief leadership could leave a lasting mark. One of Nerva's key initiatives was land reform. Many small farmers had lost property under Domitian, their livelihoods destroyed by confiscations and unfair taxation. Nerva implemented policies to return lands and provide relief from excessive tax burdens, allowing these families to rebuild their lives. Artisans, merchants, and tradespeople similarly benefited from measures that reduced financial strain and encouraged economic recovery. Public works projects created employment opportunities while improving the city's infrastructure, from aqueducts and roads to temples and marketplaces. Citizens came to view Nerva as a compassionate ruler who understood their needs and sought practical solutions. Justice was another pillar of his reforms. Nerva reevaluated cases of wrongful imprisonment and arbitrary punishment, restoring rights to those unjustly condemned. By addressing past grievances, he signaled a break from Domitian's reign of terror, offering hope to the oppressed. The courts became more transparent, and legal proceedings were restructured to emphasize fairness. While resistance existed among some senators who had benefited under Domitian, Nerva relied on tactful persuasion and moral authority to enforce change without triggering conflict. Education and culture also received attention under Nerva's guidance. He promoted the study of law, rhetoric, and philosophy, recognizing that a well-informed citizenry strengthened the state. Libraries, academies, and public lectures were encouraged, providing opportunities for intellectual growth and civic engagement. Nerva believed that a wise society produced wiser leaders and that the cultivation of knowledge was essential to the stability of Rome. Despite his focus on reforms, Nerva never lost sight of the delicate balance between generosity and authority. He understood that excessive concessions could embolden disorder, particularly among the military or provincial governors. Every measure he enacted was calculated to strengthen loyalty, promote justice, and maintain the integrity of Roman governance. His approach combined empathy with prudence, demonstrating that true leadership required both heart and strategy. Through these domestic reforms, Nerva reinforced the principles that defined his reign: moderation, foresight, and moral responsibility. Citizens remembered him not for military conquest, but for tangible improvements in daily life and the restoration of fairness after years of fear. In doing so, he cultivated a lasting legacy that would influence future emperors and shape the very idea of principled leadership. Nerva's reign, though brief, showed that even a ruler with limited time could profoundly impact an empire when guided by wisdom and compassion. As Nerva's health began to decline, the question of succession became more pressing. Though he had chosen Trajan as his heir, ensuring a smooth transition required careful planning and constant attention to both political and military sentiments. Nerva understood that Rome's history was littered with emperors who failed to secure the loyalty of the army or the Senate, leading to civil strife. He was determined that his final act as emperor would leave the empire stable and unified, avoiding the turmoil that had plagued earlier transitions. To solidify Trajan's position, Nerva arranged for public and private ceremonies affirming the adoption. The Senate, still cautious but increasingly confident in Nerva's judgment, formally recognized Trajan as Caesar, the designated successor. This symbolic act was more than mere formality. It signaled to governors, generals, and the legions that Rome had a legitimate and respected future leader. Nerva personally met with key military commanders, reassuring them that Trajan would uphold both the authority of the emperor and the welfare of the soldiers. His diplomatic skill ensured that potential sources of dissent were addressed before they could grow into serious threats. Nerva also focused on leaving a legacy of governance that would guide Trajan into years to come. He shared his strategies for managing the provinces, balancing military power with civil authority, and addressing social unrest. He reminded Trajan that leadership required wisdom, compassion, and foresight. Rome is stronger when ruled by justice, not fear, Nerva often said. These lessons, learned over decades and refined through his own reign, became the foundation upon which Trajan would build his future accomplishments. Despite the looming shadow of death, Nerva remained vigilant. He continued to address minor uprisings in the provinces and to ensure that reforms benefiting citizens were implemented. By doing so, he demonstrated that leadership extended beyond mere ceremonial authority. It required active engagement and responsibility for the well-being of the empire. Citizens and officials alike came to respect not only his decisions, but the thoughtfulness and care behind them. In the final days of his life, Nerva found solace in the knowledge that his efforts had not been in vain. Trajan, poised and prepared, would inherit an empire strengthened by careful reforms, stabilized military loyalty, and a restored social framework. On a quiet morning, surrounded by advisors and family, Nerva passed peacefully, leaving behind a legacy defined by wisdom, moderation, and foresight. His reign, though brief, marked the end of a crucial reign, a reign that prevented chaos and ensured continuity at a critical moment in Roman history. Trajan ascended without conflict, quickly earning the respect of both the Senate and the legions. The seamless transition stood as a testament to Nerva's foresight and prudence, a rare example of an emperor who had prepared the empire for the future rather than pursuing personal glory. Historians would remember Nerva as a ruler whose greatest victories were not on the battlefield, but in the careful cultivation of stability, justice, and leadership for generations to come. Through his reforms, mentorship, and strategic decisions, Nerva secured Rome's future. His reign, though short, demonstrated that wisdom and foresight could triumph over fear and uncertainty. In the annals of history, he would be celebrated not for conquest, but for the enduring stability he brought to an empire on the brink, proving that the measure of a ruler lies not in power alone, but in the ability to preserve and guide a civilization through turbulent times.
Even as Nerva worked to stabilize Rome and secure his succession, the Senate remained a complex and often unpredictable force. The body, long bruised by Domitian's tyranny, oscillated between hope and suspicion. Senators were quick to applaud his reforms, but slow to fully trust an emperor who had risen from compromise rather than conquest. Nerva, ever patient, understood that winning the Senate's loyalty required more than decrees. It demanded careful diplomacy, respect for their traditions, and an understanding of their ambitions and fears. Many senators remembered the terror of Domitian's purges. Old rivalries, past accusations, and secret betrayals lingered in the shadows of the Curia. Nerva walked this minefield with caution, carefully selecting which debates to enter and which to observe from the sidelines. He encouraged discussion on matters of taxation, infrastructure, and provincial governance, allowing senators to feel their voices mattered while subtly guiding decisions toward policies that strengthened the empire. His skill lay in moderation. He intervened when necessary, but often let debate shape outcomes, earning respect for his wisdom and restraint. Tensions flared during discussions of military funding. Some senators feared that generous allotments to the legions would give the army undue power, while others insisted on rewarding troops to prevent rebellion. Nerva mediated with precision, highlighting the need for balance. Soldiers must be respected and motivated, but the Senate's authority could not be undermined. By framing compromises as both practical and principled, he diffused potential conflicts and reinforced the idea that governance required collaboration, not domination. In addition to financial matters, Nerva addressed legal reforms within the Senate's purview. He encouraged senators to review cases of corruption, abuses of office, and unlawful confiscations, fostering transparency and accountability. While resistance existed among some members who had profited under previous regimes, Nerva's steady moral authority ensured that investigations proceeded without sparking broader dissent. Senators gradually came to appreciate that his leadership prioritized Rome's long-term stability over short-term political gain. Perhaps most importantly, Nerva demonstrated that the Senate's role in succession mattered. By consulting senators and involving them in the recognition of Trajan as heir, he reinforced their dignity while subtly guiding the outcome he desired. Senators, once skeptical, recognized that collaboration with a wise emperor could secure their influence and protect the empire from chaos. Nerva's handling of these delicate negotiations reflected decades of experience in managing politics under dangerous rulers, a skill that proved essential to his brief yet impactful reign. Through his measured approach, Nerva transformed the Senate from a body of fear and suspicion into one of cautious cooperation. He demonstrated that effective leadership involved not only commanding power, but also nurturing relationships, understanding human ambition, and guiding institutions toward the greater good. In doing so, he solidified a foundation for Trajan's future rule, ensuring that both the Senate and the army would support a smooth transition and continued stability.
From the moment Nerva decided to adopt Trajan as his heir, he approached the task not as a ceremonial formality, but as a profound responsibility. Trajan was not merely a successor, he was the embodiment of the future of Rome. Nerva devoted significant time to mentoring him, combining lessons in military strategy with governance, diplomacy, and the moral obligations of leadership. Every day became an opportunity to instill the principles that had guided him through a lifetime of politics and peril. In private chambers, the two men would study maps of the empire, discuss frontier defenses, and review reports from governors and generals. Nerva emphasized that a ruler must always balance the might of the army with the wisdom of the law. He stressed that Rome's strength came not only from conquest, but from justice, civic order, and the loyalty of its citizens. Trajan, disciplined and thoughtful, absorbed these lessons with humility, recognizing the rare opportunity to learn from a man whose judgment had been honed over decades of careful observation. Beyond military and administrative knowledge, Nerva sought to cultivate Trajan's character. He instructed the young general on the importance of fairness, integrity, and respect for the Senate. An emperor may command armies, but the people and the Senate judge his worth, Nerva would say. He also emphasized the dangers of hubris and impulsiveness, recounting tales of emperors who had fallen due to arrogance or cruelty. Trajan listened intently, understanding that his actions would be scrutinized by both contemporaries and future generations. Public appearances further reinforced Trajan's image as the rightful heir. He introduced him to senators, provincial governors, and prominent citizens, carefully demonstrating his capabilities and reinforcing his legitimacy. The legions, who admired Trajan's military skill, were reassured by Nerva's endorsement, ensuring that the young general would command loyalty without fear of mutiny. This strategic cultivation of public and military perception was crucial. It reduced the risk of unrest during Nerva's declining health and reinforced a sense of continuity in Rome. In addition to these formal lessons, Nerva encouraged Trajan to observe the empire firsthand. They reviewed the administration of distant provinces, studied economic challenges, and discussed social reforms. Trajan's early exposure to the complexities of governance prepared him for the complexities of rule, from balancing local customs with Roman law to addressing civil unrest with tact. By the time Trajan would ascend to the throne, he was not only a capable general, but a thoughtful statesman, equipped to uphold the principles of justice and moderation that Nerva valued so highly. Through this mentorship, Nerva ensured that the future of the empire rested in capable hands. The lessons he imparted, combined with the reforms and stability he had established during his reign, created a seamless bridge between his era and Trajan's. Rome, once teetering on the edge of uncertainty, now had a successor prepared to lead with wisdom, courage, and foresight. Nerva's foresight ensured that the empire would endure, demonstrating that true leadership is measured not by the length of one's reign, but by the strength and stability left behind.
While Nerva managed stability in the capital, the distant provinces presented constant challenges that tested his leadership and the lessons he imparted to Trajan. The empire stretched across vast territories, each with its own customs, politics, and occasional unrest. From the cold forests of Germania to the sun-scorched plains of North Africa, the provinces demanded attention, tact, and decisive action. Nerva knew that Rome's strength depended on both the loyalty of its military and the satisfaction of its citizens throughout the empire. One crisis arose in the province of Germania Superior, where a local governor had been accused of exploiting farmers, demanding excessive tribute, and imposing harsh penalties. Tensions had grown to the point of rebellion among the populace. Nerva dispatched envoys to assess the situation, accompanied by Trajan, who was eager to witness firsthand the delicate balance between military power and diplomacy.
Together, they investigated the complaints, held hearings with local leaders, and restored confiscated lands to the farmers. By combining firmness with fairness, they quelled unrest without the need for mass executions or heavy-handed suppression. In Dacia, another frontier province, rumors of mutinous soldiers reached Rome. The legions stationed there had grown restless due to delayed pay and harsh conditions. Nerva, understanding the critical importance of the army's loyalty, sent Trajan with orders to negotiate and oversee the distribution of supplies and pay. Trajan's presence, backed by Nerva's authority, reassured the soldiers that their concerns were heard and rebellion was averted. This experience became a crucial lesson for Trajan, showing him how to balance authority with empathy, a skill that would define his own future reign. Meanwhile, in Hispania, disputes between landowners and local workers threatened economic stability. Nerva implemented reforms to mediate the conflict, ensuring that the laws protected the weaker citizens without alienating influential elites. By addressing grievances promptly and fairly, he prevented localized disputes from escalating into wider unrest, demonstrating the importance of proactive governance. These provincial challenges were more than administrative exercises, they were lessons in leadership for Trajan. Nerva intentionally involved him in every step, from negotiating with rebellious soldiers to mediating disputes between citizens and governors. Trajan learned that power without justice could lead to resentment, and that effective governance required both strategy and moral judgment. He saw that an emperor's decisions, even in remote provinces, rippled across the empire, affecting stability, loyalty, and the people's faith in Rome. Through these trials, Nerva reinforced the principles that had guided his reign: balance, foresight, and moral responsibility. By successfully managing crises in the provinces and preparing Trajan to handle them, he strengthened the empire's foundations and ensured that the next generation of leadership would be equipped to face the same challenges. Rome's future, once uncertain, began to shine with the promise of continuity, stability, and measured authority. In the quiet moments between council meetings and provincial correspondence, Nerva often reflected on the arc of his life. From his early days as a young senator, learning the complexities of Roman governance, to the perilous years under Domitian, and finally to his brief but consequential reign as emperor, he recognized that every experience had been a lesson in patience, prudence, and moral responsibility. These reflections shaped not only his policies, but the mentorship he offered to Trajan, ensuring that his knowledge would outlive him. Nerva frequently pondered the nature of power. He understood that authority alone could compel obedience, but respect and loyalty had to be earned through fairness, wisdom, and foresight. He had seen rulers fall who wielded armies yet lacked moral judgment, and he had observed the dangers of ruling through fear. These insights guided his approach to governance. Every decree, every act of diplomacy, and every reform was measured against the principle of justice, the welfare of the citizens, and the stability of the empire. He also reflected on the fleeting nature of life and the importance of legacy. At 66, he was acutely aware that his time on the throne was limited. Yet he found solace in knowing that the foundation he laid, through social reforms, judicial improvements, and the careful preparation of Trajan, would endure. For Nerva, the measure of a ruler was not the length of his reign or the conquests he achieved, but the stability, justice, and wisdom he imparted to the empire and its people. Beyond politics, Nerva cherished personal virtues, humility, empathy, and the capacity to listen. He recalled moments when a simple act of attention, hearing the grievances of a citizen, mediating a dispute, or rewarding loyalty, had prevented unrest or built trust. He believed that these small acts, multiplied across the empire, were more potent than displays of wealth or military might. Leadership, he often told Trajan, was about cultivating these virtues in oneself and inspiring them in others. Nerva's reflections extended to his relationship with the Senate and the legions. He saw them not as instruments to control, but as pillars of the empire that needed guidance and respect. By balancing the demands of the military with the authority of the Senate, and by addressing the needs of citizens fairly, he had created a model of governance that could endure beyond his lifetime. It was this understanding that gave him confidence in Trajan's succession, knowing that Rome's future rested on capable, principled leadership. As he prepared for the inevitable end of his reign, Nerva embraced a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had navigated dangers, mitigated unrest, and fostered justice across the empire. He had mentored a successor prepared to handle his work. In his final moments, he could look back without regret, knowing that he had preserved Rome's stability, strengthened its institutions, and left behind a legacy defined by wisdom, moderation, and foresight.
The final days of Nerva's reign were marked by quiet dignity. Though his body weakened with age, his mind remained sharp, focused on ensuring the empire's stability and Trajan's smooth succession. Citizens, senators, and soldiers alike sensed the gravity of the moment. They witnessed not only the passing of an emperor, but the careful transfer of authority from a man of wisdom to a capable and trusted heir. Nerva understood that how an emperor departed from power could be as important as how he ruled. In the days leading up to his death, Nerva oversaw the final confirmations of Trajan's authority. Ceremonies were held in the Senate, where the young general was formally recognized as Caesar, the designated successor. Military commanders from distant provinces sent messages of loyalty, affirming their acceptance of the transition. Public proclamations highlighted Trajan's experience, integrity, and readiness to lead, reassuring citizens that Rome would not face the instability that often accompanied the death of an emperor. Every detail was carefully managed to prevent misunderstanding or unrest. When Nerva passed peacefully, surrounded by advisors and Trajan, the empire collectively mourned a ruler whose leadership had been defined by prudence rather than spectacle. The people remembered his reforms, the return of confiscated lands, the easing of taxes, the improvements in infrastructure, and the restoration of justice. Senators reflected on the delicate balance he had maintained between their authority and the power of the emperor. Soldiers acknowledged his skill in preserving loyalty without resorting to fear or unnecessary punishment. Across the empire, Nerva's reputation as a moderate and wise ruler became firmly established. Trajan's ascension was met with a smooth transition, a testament to the meticulous planning and mentorship of Nerva. The young emperor, having observed the challenges of the provinces, the complexities of governance, and the nuances of leadership, was well prepared to assume responsibility. Trajan's first actions reflected the lessons learned from Nerva: fair treatment of citizens, respect for the Senate, and careful attention to the legions. The stability of Rome remained intact, and the empire was poised for a period of expansion and prosperity. Historians would later regard Nerva as one of the 5 good emperors, celebrated not for military conquest or grandeur, but for the wisdom, moderation, and foresight that had preserved the empire during a fragile period. His brief reign demonstrated that true power lies not in fear or domination, but in prudence, justice, and the cultivation of capable successors. Nerva's legacy endured, not merely in monuments or decrees, but in the very stability of Rome and the effective rule of Trajan that followed. In the end, Nerva's life and reign stand as a testament to the impact of wisdom and foresight in leadership. He had transformed uncertainty into stability, fear into respect, and potential chaos into order.
Though he ruled for only 3 years, the foundations he laid ensured that the Roman Empire could continue to flourish for generations, a lasting proof that an emperor's greatest triumph is the enduring prosperity and security of the people he serves. While Rome celebrated stability under Nerva, the far-flung provinces offered a more intimate view of the emperor's impact. In cities and villages across Hispania, Gaul, and Asia Minor, citizens experienced the tangible effects of his reforms. Farmers who had feared losing their land now worked fertile fields with renewed hope. Merchants once burdened by excessive taxation could trade freely, and local courts operated with fairness and transparency. Nerva's influence extended beyond decrees. It was visible in the lives of ordinary people who, for the first time in years, felt protected by the empire rather than oppressed by it. In Hispania, a small town near Tarraco had suffered under the heavy-handed rule of a governor loyal to Domitian. When reports reached Rome, Nerva dispatched envoys who worked alongside local magistrates to implement reforms. Confiscated lands were returned, tax relief was granted, and corrupt officials were removed. The townspeople welcomed these changes with cautious optimism, recognizing the emperor's commitment to justice. Young Trajan, observing the process, noted how the application of law and fairness could earn the loyalty of the populace without resorting to fear or force. This experience became an early lesson in effective provincial governance. Meanwhile, in the northern frontiers, the legions stationed along the Rhine faced harsh weather, supply challenges, and periodic skirmishes with local tribes. Soldiers reported unrest caused by delayed pay and grievances over harsh treatment. Nerva, understanding the importance of military loyalty, ensured that funds were distributed promptly and that officers mediated disputes with fairness. Trajan accompanied these inspections, witnessing firsthand how strategic empathy could maintain discipline and morale while avoiding rebellion. The soldiers, initially wary of an emperor who lacked a military background, gradually recognized Nerva's wisdom and his commitment to justice. Even in remote provinces such as the deserts of Arabia and the mountains of Dacia, Nerva's policies were felt. Governors were reminded that their authority derived from service to Rome, not personal gain. Local populations found protection from arbitrary taxation and abuse. Minor rebellions were resolved through negotiation rather than bloodshed, and the administration emphasized the practical application of Roman law alongside respect for local traditions. By addressing these challenges systematically, Nerva demonstrated that careful oversight combined with moral authority could stabilize the empire more effectively than intimidation or brute force. These provincial successes reinforced the lessons Nerva imparted to Trajan. The young heir observed how an emperor's policies could ripple across distant lands, shaping loyalty, productivity, and faith in Rome. He learned that leadership required both strategic vision and personal attention to detail, that justice and fairness could achieve more than military might alone, and that the strength of an empire rested upon the well-being of its people in every corner. For Nerva, these lessons were his final gift, a living blueprint for governance that Trajan would carry forward into his own era of leadership.
Though much of Nerva's life was consumed by politics and the burdens of empire, he valued the quiet bonds of family and friendship, recognizing that personal relationships shaped the character of a ruler as much as public policy. From his early years, he had been guided by his father's teachings, learning the principles of justice, temperance, and patience. These lessons remained with him throughout his life, forming the foundation of his moral compass. Even as emperor, he reflected on those early influences when making difficult decisions, understanding that leadership demanded wisdom rooted in ethical conduct. Nerva maintained close ties with a small circle of trusted advisors and friends, men whose counsel he respected and whose loyalty he could rely upon.
These relationships were cultivated with care. He avoided the sycophants and opportunists who had flourished under Domitian. His advisors came to trust that Nerva listened genuinely and weighed their counsel thoughtfully, never rushing to rash decisions. This atmosphere of mutual respect allowed for nuanced discussion, creative problem-solving, and the maintenance of stability even during periods of tension. Family, too, played a vital role in Nerva's life. Though he had no children of his own to inherit the empire, he treated Trajan as both a son and a protege. Beyond political training, Nerva shared with him lessons in character, empathy, and moral responsibility. He often recounted stories of his own youth, explaining how careful observation and measured action had preserved him through dangerous political climates. These personal exchanges deepened Trajan's understanding of leadership as an art rooted in both intellect and virtue. Nerva also remembered the mentors who had guided him in earlier years. Their teachings on rhetoric, philosophy, and law shaped the way he approached difficult problems, encouraged reflection, and reinforced the importance of foresight. He saw leadership not as domination, but as stewardship, the protection of institutions, the care for citizens, and the cultivation of capable successors. These principles became central to his governance, influencing not only the policies he enacted, but also the example he set for Trajan and the generations that followed. Even in the palace, surrounded by advisors, soldiers, and bureaucrats, Nerva valued moments of genuine human connection. He listened to the concerns of ordinary citizens, offered counsel to those in need, and recognized that empathy strengthened authority. Through these relationships, he reinforced a leadership style that combined moral integrity with strategic acumen. In doing so, he demonstrated that the character of an emperor, shaped by family, friends, and mentors, was inseparable from the stability and prosperity of the empire itself. By balancing the demands of governance with personal bonds, Nerva created a legacy of leadership rooted in wisdom, humility, and foresight. He showed that even amidst the pressures of ruling a vast empire, a ruler could remain guided by principles, compassion, and the lessons of those who came before. These relationships, both personal and educational, ensured that Nerva's influence extended far beyond his own reign, shaping the character and judgment of the leaders who would follow. Even under Nerva's steady rule, Rome itself was not immune to unrest. The streets of the capital, though calmer than during Domitian's oppressive reign, occasionally trembled with tension. Citizens, soldiers, and senators each had their own expectations, grievances, and ambitions. Nerva understood that the heart of the empire was fragile. If the city fell into disorder, the entire realm could be destabilized. He approached these crises with the same careful balance he applied to provincial affairs, combining vigilance, negotiation, and timely action. One challenge arose when food shortages threatened the plebeian districts. Grain shipments from Egypt had been delayed, and rumors of scarcity spread quickly. Panic could have ignited riots, but Nerva acted swiftly. He ordered emergency rations to be distributed from imperial granaries, while envoys worked with local guilds to organize temporary markets. At the same time, he addressed the Senate, explaining the situation and the measures being taken. By simultaneously managing logistics and perception, Nerva ensured that fear did not turn into chaos. Citizens were reassured, and the city remained orderly. A more subtle threat came from political conspiracies. Certain senators, still uneasy about the shift in power after Domitian, attempted to manipulate public opinion or exploit minor unrest for personal gain. Nerva, aware of their plots, employed careful intelligence gathering and discreet negotiation. He never resorted to overt intimidation. Instead, he balanced firmness with tact, addressing threats before they could escalate while maintaining the appearance of fairness. This approach preserved his reputation as a just ruler, even while neutralizing potential rebellion. The Praetorian Guard remained a potential source of internal disruption. Though loyal in large part due to Nerva's generosity and careful diplomacy, murmurs of dissatisfaction occasionally surfaced. He met directly with the officers, offering reassurances, rewards, and reminders of their duty to the empire. His calm demeanor and firm yet respectful approach reinforced loyalty and minimized the risk of mutiny. Trajan observed these interactions closely, learning firsthand the delicate art of maintaining discipline and allegiance within the capital itself. Through these episodes, Nerva demonstrated that governing Rome required more than decrees. It required attentiveness to both human nature and circumstance. Crises in the city were as much about perception, morale, and communication as they were about tangible solutions. Nerva's ability to anticipate unrest, act decisively, and maintain public confidence became a hallmark of his reign. Citizens and officials alike recognized that stability under his rule was not imposed by fear, but cultivated by wisdom and foresight. By addressing threats both large and small, Nerva preserved the integrity of the capital and reinforced the empire's overall stability. His actions exemplified the principle that leadership in Rome demanded vigilance, prudence, and moral judgment. In managing crises within the city, he ensured that the foundations of authority, loyalty, and public trust would endure, providing a secure platform for Trajan to assume the reins of power with confidence.
In the quiet hours of the night, when the city of Rome slept beneath the glow of torches and the murmurs of distant streets faded, Nerva often reflected on the impermanence of life and power. He had long known that his time as emperor would be brief, and yet the awareness of mortality sharpened his focus rather than diminishing his resolve. Every decision, every reform, every lesson passed to Trajan carried the weight of legacy, the opportunity to shape an empire long after he was gone. Nerva considered the arc of his life, from the disciplined upbringing in his family home to the turbulent years under Domitian, and finally to his own ascension. He saw a path marked by careful observation, moral choices, and strategic foresight. Each challenge he faced had reinforced a single guiding truth, that the measure of a ruler was not in conquest or wealth, but in stability, justice, and prosperity left behind. In contemplating his mortality, he found solace in knowing that he had acted not for personal glory, but for the enduring welfare of Rome. He also reflected on the nature of legacy and succession. Trajan, disciplined, intelligent, and principled, embodied the continuation of his ideals. Nerva took comfort in the fact that the empire's future would not rest on chance or fear, but on the guidance he had provided and the systems he had strengthened. He knew that Trajan's character had been shaped not only by natural ability, but by the experiences and mentorship carefully orchestrated over the past years. The empire would continue, safeguarded by foresight and prudence. Philosophically, Nerva mused on the transient nature of human ambition. He had seen emperors rise and fall, friends betrayed, and rivals eliminated, often for reasons as trivial as suspicion or envy. In contrast, he had governed with moderation, seeking balance rather than domination, empathy rather than terror. His life had taught him that fear might enforce obedience temporarily, but only justice, wisdom, and integrity could sustain an empire through generations. Even as he faced the inevitability of death, he embraced this lesson, confident that Rome's strength lay in principles rather than mere authority. These contemplations were not only personal, but deeply practical. Each reflection reinforced the decisions he had made in governance, succession, and reform. Every act, from ensuring the loyalty of the legions to mediating provincial disputes, was connected to the understanding that life is finite,
but the stability of Rome could endure. In these final nights, Nerva's mind, clear and steady, mapped the lasting impact of his reign, an enduring blueprint of measured authority, wisdom, and foresight. Through these reflections, he achieved a sense of peace. He knew that his life, carefully guided by principle and prudence, had served its purpose. The empire would survive, his reforms would endure, and his chosen successor would carry forward the lessons of a ruler who understood the delicate balance between power and morality. Nerva's contemplation of mortality was not despair, but clarity, the recognition that the true measure of an emperor is the strength of what he leaves behind. When news of Nerva's passing reached the city, Rome experienced a mixture of mourning, gratitude, and cautious optimism. Citizens lined the streets, paying their respects to an emperor whose reign, though brief, had brought stability and fairness after decades of fear. Temples and forums echoed with prayers for his soul, while public announcements celebrated his reforms, justice, and wise governance. The people remembered him not for conquest or grandeur, but for restoring their trust in the empire and its institutions. The Senate convened to honor Nerva's memory. Senators, once wary of compromise candidates, praised his moderation and prudence. They reflected on the delicate balance he had maintained between their authority and the emperor's power, acknowledging that his ability to govern without intimidation had strengthened both the capital and the provinces. Many remarked that his leadership had demonstrated a rare wisdom. A ruler could command respect not through fear, but through foresight, fairness, and integrity. Meanwhile, the legions, the backbone of Rome's military might, acknowledged the thoughtful care with which Nerva had maintained their loyalty. Generals and soldiers alike recognized that the emperor's measured rewards and personal attention had reinforced discipline while avoiding unnecessary violence or coercion. Letters of loyalty poured in from provincial commanders, confirming their support for Trajan and signaling the continuity of stability across the empire. Trajan, now formally recognized as Caesar and heir, assumed leadership with confidence, shaped by years of careful mentorship. His early actions reflected the lessons learned under Nerva: equal treatment of citizens, respect for the Senate, and prudent attention to military concerns. He visited the provinces, reassured the legions, and consulted with governors to ensure that every corner of the empire remained stable. The seamless transition demonstrated the foresight of Nerva's planning, turning a potentially turbulent succession into a moment of continuity and strength. Public ceremonies honored Nerva's memory, celebrating his contributions to Rome and his role as a stabilizing force. Citizens, soldiers, and officials alike recognized that his legacy extended far beyond his short reign. The empire's foundations were secure, and the principles he championed, moderation, justice, foresight, would guide future generations. Trajan's early popularity reflected both his personal merits and the careful groundwork laid by his predecessor. Through this period of transition, it became clear that Nerva's influence endured. The empire, once fragile and vulnerable, entered a new era under Trajan, fortified by stability, strengthened institutions, and the lessons of a wise ruler. Nerva's reign, brief yet profound, demonstrated that the true power of an emperor is not only in conquests or wealth, but in the foresight, justice, and moral authority that ensure the empire's survival long after the ruler's life has ended.